Good afternoon, everyone. As Matt mentions, I'm Chris, one of the equity consultants at Vested. So, briefly, Vested, we're the UK's first regulated digital share scheme and equity management platform. We are an FCA accredited business, and we only deal with equity. So this is, 6 questions that we hear a lot. So it's just, this is the first in a series of webinars. So we're talking about the 6 key questions, and then further on, we'll also be talking about things like how to set up an EMI scheme specifically. We'll be talking about, the different conditions and things you can use to recruit, to retain and reward. So yeah, we're running them on a monthly basis. So I see this is the first one. So we'll get started with the 6 key questions. So, and there's me. So some of the things we'll be covering today: number of shares to give, how to price them, how to protect your business. So it's the common FAQs. So how many shares should I give to people? Now, this is probably the number one question we get asked. And the answer is, it really depends on the business and what you're looking to do. So things that you need to figure out: how much equity are you going to set aside for the scheme? How many shares should each person get? How do I manage dilution as new team members join the scheme? So what's fairly common is we'll encourage you to look at it from the back end first. You're the only person who knows what you would accept for your business. So let's say you intend to sell your business for £10 million in 10 years' time. How much of that £10 million would you be happy to share with the team? Let's say 10%. You'll notice I like using nice round numbers to help with my maths. So let's say it's 10% of £10 million. So you're going to share £1 million with your team as a reward, as a thank you for all their hard work in getting you to that £10 million exit. Now, if I'm the only team member sharing, I'm very happy with my £1 million. Especially, if I've gone down one of the really tax efficient ways of doing it. I'm potentially looking at a £900,000 profit there. If I'm one of 100 people, then I'm getting slightly less. If I'm one of 1,000 people, I'm getting a lot less. So, you need to think what's fair, what's equitable. And it's not a one size fits all. Key employees tends to be early stage employees tend to get a little bit more because they've taken the most risk. They've joined at the riskiest part, But how do I manage that? You give that 10% to employees. There's nothing left for anyone else. So, it's about sort of trying to think, how much am I going to give overall? How do I want to portion it out? My head of business development, they're key. Matt and I work in sales, so head of business development is always key. That person, I'm going to give them 2%. My head of tech, they're building a digital platform, they're going to have 2% as well. So that's 4% gone already. So there's only 6% left. So how many more people are you going to give it to? So it's about sort of thinking, how am I going to portion up this pie? And we have plenty of resources available. There's something a book called Slicing the Pie, which is specifically about this. So how much equity am I going to give? How much am I going to give overall? Do I want to give more than 10%? Would I be happy giving 20%? That's £2 million if you sell for 10 million. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to give away too much because this is your money. But what's going to be fair? 10%, 20%, 30%. What's common in the UK? Between 5 and 15%. But what's the model? Is it a sprint towards an exit? In the west coast of America, in Silicon Valley, you tend to see larger amounts of equity. But that's a sprint to the exit. These people are, fully aware that we're getting this equity because there's an exit plan very soon. So, how many shares do you have to people? You need to sort of think from the back end forward. If there's not an exit plan, what's the goal? Is it you want to pay dividends to people? An option scheme, a share scheme. There's only 2 ways to monetize it. It's either going to be a sale or it's going to be a dividend. So it's just thinking, how much equity do I want to give away? Is there any questions come through on
that? Not specifically. What I'll do, Chris, is just for everybody in here, I'll put a link in there to the blog that is around exactly that question. So just as you've explained, Chris, so some of those considerations, and then I think within that blog itself, it does help talk through maybe a bit of a method in able to help people build it and build a bit of a, I suppose, use that methodology to build a bit of a matrix to say, okay, somebody started with me early on and they're at this seniority, then this is what I would divvy up to them, and then build that matrix out from there. So I've attached that link. Hopefully that's helpful for people. There is a question that's come in that is it's an interesting one, I suppose, in this area, but is what's to offer new team members when we are pre-revenue and don't want to offer shares. So I suppose it's just thinking about how you've just structured that, Chris. What would the considerations be when you're looking at something like that?
Yeah, so typically you don't share real shares, full shares. And if you gave me 10% of your company pre-revenue to come and work for you, that's great. I quit the next day, I still own 10% of the company. So you would typically either offer conditional equity or you would offer options. So an option scheme is very common. EMI, the British government approved option scheme, is an incredibly common way to do it. An option is the right to buy a share at a predetermined price at a predetermined point in the future. Conditional equity, you're giving shares with conditions, which brings us lovely way onto vesting schedule. So essentially, if you're going to give me some equity, a vesting schedule basically allows the options just to go through a vesting period. So they only get their full allocation over, it could be time. So you're rewarding people for staying or for meeting specific goals. So you can see here in this example, in this table we've got, right, there's a 1 year cliff. So a 1 year cliff means nothing happens in the first year. So this is a 4-year vest. So they get nothing first 12 months. And then the options start to vest until after the 4 years, all of the options have vested. Or the conditions have been met. Now, that doesn't mean they can do anything with them. You're rewarding them by giving them this equity. But they've not got the equity free and clear. They can't just turn around and sell it unless you wish to let them to. So, the reason that people tend to do option and share schemes, 3 reasons: to recruit, to retain, to reward. So you're recruiting people by giving them that equity in the company, that sense of ownership. They're going to have a piece of the pie. They're going to have skin in the game. You're rewarding them for being with you over 4 years. That's going to really help that retention. Right, okay, after 4 years, I've got this, they're all mine. But, it's only at a monetizing event they actually get the reward. So, after this, if this is options or if this is conditional equity, depending on what those conditions are, you may not be paying dividends yet. They may not have the shares yet. They may not have the right to exercise yet. So a vesting period is just giving it over a period of time, which is to say, really sort of, you can recruit people by saying, I'm going to give you this equity. You have to be here for X amount of time, and then you get it. The retention point is there. So they know after 4 years, this is what they have. And that's just, we're using time here. It's a very simple metric. It could be company value. It could be an actual KPI. There's lots of different things you can put. Is there any questions on that?
Yes, question come in and said, what would on that point, what would be the point of doing on this if they're only rewarded on a 5-year exit plan? Would this only be beneficial on growth shares?
So if you think about it, you're going to be hiring throughout the period. If your plan is after 5 years, I'm going to exit. So you say, Chris, I'm going to give you 10,000 options over a 5-year period. When we sell in 5 years' time, you have 10,000 options. Matt joins the company 2 years later. You say, Matt, I'm going to give you 10,000 options on a 5-year period. If the company sells in 3 years, that's one of the conditions you can put in. Do you want something called accelerated vesting? Does Matt get all 10,000 after only 3 years with the company, or does he only get his 6,000? Bear in mind when you're giving options or giving shares, the key fundamental about equity is you cannot give someone something of value without there being a tax consequence. So if we valued the business at £1 million and you just gave me 10% of it, that's £100,000 worth of shares. The very first thing that's going to happen is HMRC are going to send me a £45,000 tax bill. So if you're granting conditional equity growth shares, or if you're giving options, you're not giving something for free. An option is the right to buy a share at a predetermined price at a predetermined point in the future. A growth share is issued above the current value of the business. So if I joined and you say in 5 years' time, Chris, you can have 10,000 options, bear in mind that I'm going to have my exercise price for my options, or the hurdle rate that my growth shares are issued at, considerably less than Matt's are if he joins 2 years later, because the company has grown in value at that point. But typically you put a vesting condition in, so that they earn it over a period of time.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Chris. And I suppose it's also thinking as well, isn't it? One of your points there is what's the end goal of the business is to think about, if it is exit, great. It's not exit for everybody, so therefore you might be looking that you want to incentivize somebody to give them equity so that, the end game is that they just own a bit of the growing business and they're able to get dividends and they're a real shareholder, but they earn them over time rather than just paying for them. And to always think about what that end goal is as well. I'm just going to pop another link into the chat for everybody, just related to that section. And again, hopefully that will help give you a bit more bedtime reading.
Yes, it'll definitely help you if you've got insomnia. But you can see here, when can my team access my shares? That depends how you're going to set it up. So we were talking there before, exit only or exercisable. Exit only, very clean, very simple. The employee can only exercise their options when the business is sold, or there's a change in control or a significant change in the company's structure. The reason exit only is so clean, they are not shareholders. They will only become a shareholder for a nanosecond as the transaction actually goes through. So an exit only is very easy, very clean. It only pays out an exit. It basically means they get a lump sum when the exit occurs. So if there's no exit plan, then an exit only obviously doesn't particularly work. So you're not worried about dividends, you're not worried about voting control, you're not worried about different share classes, anything like that, because, as I say, it's just a simple transaction. They're a shareholder, then their shares immediately sell. So their options only become shares at the point of exit. Exercisable means they have the right to buy the option to turn it into a share at the completion of either the vesting schedule or the performance milestone. So it could be the previous example, it was a 4-year vest. So the first year was a cliff. They got the rest over the 3-year period. It could be when the company is valued at £5 million, you have the right to buy these options and turn them into shares. It could be, Chris, I'll give you 10,000 growth shares if you bring in £1 million worth of business in the next 12 months. If you only bring in between 750 grand and £1 million, you only get 7,500. You bring in between 500 grand and 750, you get 5,000. You bring in less than 500 grand, you don't get anything. So it's all about having that conditionality. The whole point is to help the business grow. Options and shares, unfortunately, they don't always go up in value. The plan is that the business grows, but if the business doesn't grow, the options or the growth shares aren't worth anything. It's an incentive to sort of really motivate the employee, because they have that sense of ownership. They know that every single thing they do on a day-to-day basis will affect the value of the company and therefore the value of their shares or options. But yeah, you can put all sorts of conditions in. They have to be measurable and tangible. Time is very, very, very common because you can't really argue with time. So it's a case of I get them after 5 years. Well, if you're still here in 5 years, you get them. If you're not still here in 5 years, you don't. You know, there's no arguing with that. So that's why it tends to be very common.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Question come in just on those there, and it's related to time. Is to say, are there any restrictions on that, or can you say, okay, well, it's exit only, and that can be, you know, your example was 5 years, but can that be any timescale?
So it depends what you're looking to do. You know, EMI is the most popular option scheme in the UK because it is the British government backed option scheme, which means it's incredibly tax efficient, not only for the company, but also for the individual recipient. One of the restrictions on the EMI scheme is the maximum amount of time it can run is 10 years. Now, bear in mind, this is supposed to be a motivating factor. If you say to me, Chris, you can have these options, and you know we expect that they'll be able to pay out in 25 years. That's not that motivating. You know, 25 years is a long time in the future, especially for a young man like myself. But you know, it really depends. You know, you've got to think about it motivating. We sort of say, you know, 10 years is, you know, the sort of maximum you want to be sort of doing things. And there's also, you know, around the tax and the HMRC reporting and things like that as well.
Well, there's another one related, and can you have both? Can you have a mix and match, so time-based and
yeah. I mean, it's you could say you get these options over a 5-year period, but you only benefit at an exit. Or, you know, it could be a 5-year period and you hit these goals. You know, if it's growth shares, you say, Chris, here's 10,000 growth shares. They are conditional until you meet these requirements. You have been an employee for 5 years. You have sold over £1 million worth of product over, you know, in each of the 5 years, things like that. You can put whatever in you want. Now, we're sort of going into this conditions here, which, so I'll just flick to the next one while I continue to talk about it, but you can set both time-based and performance-based milestones. They've got to be clear, measurable, and tangible. That's why time is so popular. You know, we've got the guide here, 26 conditional KPIs, which is, you know, something that I know I send out to a lot of people. I've been remiss. If you have any questions or it's something specifically relating to your business, you know, I can obviously only talk in generalities on the webinar. But if it's something specific, you know, you can book a free consultation call, either with myself or one of my colleagues, and we'll actually go through it with your specific needs in mind, and we can explore all the different avenues for you. But yeah, you know, the different conditions, it can be time and performance based. Yeah, that's no problem at all.
Well, I'll put that link on, Chris, just in the chat. That's a really good guide, I think, to be able to download.
Okay, so, you know, how should I price my shares? As I mentioned before, you cannot give someone something of value without there being a tax consequence. So, you know, you look at things like nominal value. It's the face value of the share is determined by how the company's share capital is denominated. So, you know, essentially when you're doing share schemes, you don't want there to be tax implications for the employee. So, you know, typically, you know, if you're doing an EMI, for example, you have to have an HMRC approved valuation. So you get two actual values given. You get the unrestricted market value. This is the pure market value of the shares. This is, you know, no restrictions. Or the AMV, the actual market value. We're using this to set the income tax point. So typically when you're giving someone options, especially, you're looking for the lowest possible value to issue at. Now, what that means is there's the most upside for the individual. It's a reward scheme. It's to retain them, it's to motivate them. You want to give them the maximum possible reward. But also, you know, if you're looking at one of the approved schemes, there's the most upside for the business. You know, so just to quickly run over, in the next webinar we do, which I believe is the 4th of October, we're actually looking specifically at EMI schemes. But if you're looking at an EMI scheme, then the business gets tax breaks. The cost of setting up and running the scheme can be fully offset against corporation tax. But also, the gain the recipient makes can also be fully offset against corporation tax. So you want to give them the most gain that they can have, because then the business can offset that. So it's a tax write-off. So, typically, unless you're a zero value startup, you would need a valuation before you issued any growth shares or especially you always need a valuation if you're going to issue any options.
Well, thanks, Chris. Someone's just asked, I mean, you've mentioned a couple of schemes there. Someone's asked, could you give a brief explanation of different schemes that are available?
Yeah, so there's three main things that you would look at. So you've got the EMI scheme. As I mentioned, it's the British government approved option scheme. So there are certain fairly stringent eligibility criteria. I won't go through them all. As I say, the next webinar is actually on that. But essentially, one of the most important ones is you have to be a full-time UK-based employee. So it can't go to contractors, subcontractors, non-exec directors, can't go to people not residing in the UK. So, the rule of thumb from a tax efficiency standpoint, if you can do EMI, do EMI. It's an option scheme, which is the right to buy a share at a predetermined price at a predetermined point in the future. So let's say, for example, we valued the business at £1 a share. It was £1 million business. You've got 1 million shares, £1 a share. Fast forward 5 years, the company sells for £10 million. So if it's an exit-based scheme, I get my £10. £1 comes off because I have to buy the option to turn it into a share. I'm left with a £9 gain. As long as I've held the options for a minimum of 24 months, I only pay 10% capital gains tax. So I walk away with £8.10 per share. As I mentioned before, the company can offset the gain I made. I made a £9 gain. The company can offset £9 per share against their corporation tax. Incredibly tax efficient. An unapproved option is set up exactly the same way. It's the same legal contract. Different tax consequences. So you typically give that to your contractors, your subcontractors, people outside the UK, non-exec directors. Not tax efficient at all. Unless, if you're outside the UK, they will face their local tax consequence. So it could be tax efficient outside the UK, depending on what the tax is, wherever they are. Growth shares are different. Growth shares are real shares, which are issued above the value of the company, but they're issued conditionally. So let's say, again, same scenario, company's valued at £1 million, 1 million shares, £1 a share. Can't give someone something of value without there being a tax consequence. So rather than just give the shares, you give shares above the value of the company. So rather than £1 a share, you give them shares and they share above £1.20. So there's a difference between what the company's worth and what the company and what you issue the shares at. So what that means is I only share above that £1.20. So fast forward 5 years, company sells for £10 a share. My percentage is only in the £8.80 between the £1.20 it was issued at and the £10 it's sold at. So I only get my share of the growth of the company. 20% capital gains tax on growth shares. So it's not as tax efficient as EMI. It's more tax efficient than unapproved options. However, there's no eligibility criteria, so you can issue them to people inside the UK, outside the UK. They don't have to be employees, so on and so forth. And some industries are not allowed to do EMI. Banks, lawyers, accountants, property developers, hoteliers, domestic care home operators, farmers, market gardeners, and shipbuilders. So if you're in one of those industries, growth shares is the most tax efficient for you.
Well, thanks, Chris. Really good.
So what happens if someone leaves? So when you're doing this, you can put specific conditions in, but what's common is you have what's called a good leaver or a bad leaver provision. Now, a bad leaver leaves with nothing. So they don't get anything. But a bad leaver is only gross misconduct, criminality, or breach of contract, unless you have actually specified otherwise. So bad leavers, they don't get it. And what happens if someone leaves on good terms? Do they still lose everything? Do they get to keep everything? Somewhere in between? Do they get to keep things, but they've got to exercise them? Do they get to keep what they've earned? What happens if, people's circumstances change, illnesses, people move? You can just say, if you leave, you lose. It's very common. But some people, sort of think, well, that person's helped me grow the business for 5 years. I'm not going to sell for another 5. So they've put their 5 years hard work in. Do they get to keep that 5 years hard work? Or did they lose everything because they've left? So you can protect yourself. And that's what conditional equity is about. That's what having the good leaver and bad leaver provisions in there is all about. So that's the 6 questions. It's all about managing it from start to finish. And the vested platform is an end-to-end equity management platform. So, if you were going to do an option scheme, for example, there's 4 steps. The first step is you need to do what we call the pre-valuation admin. Do you need to do a subdivision? Do you need to create an option pool or a share authorization? So you have to follow the Companies Act of 2006. So you need a written board resolution with 100% approval and a written shareholder resolution with 75% approval. Now, the vested platform as a digital platform manages everything digitally. So I would click 2 buttons. An email would go out to the board. Do you pass this written board resolution to do this? Everyone clicks yes on the email. It then sends out the written shareholder resolution. It's a 75% approval. As soon as 75% of the votes have said yes, the platform will automatically pass it. Now, the vested platform also has 2-way integration with Companies House. So anything you do on the vested platform, you never need to actually make another Companies House filing again. It's all managed via that. So let's say you were going to do a subdivision. So you've got 100 shares, you want to have 1 million. We click the buttons, the resolutions go out. As soon as everyone passes it, the platform automatically files the correct information with Companies House. Step 2 is the valuation. Now, we've got an in-house valuation team. Everything's in-house with vested. So we're doing about 85 of them a month. So we get the financial information, we write the valuation for you. It's then submitted to HMRC if it's an EMI scheme. So that's step 2 of the valuation. Step 3, design the contract. It's a legal contract for options. So we take you through our scheme designer, which auto-populates the legal contract. Then sent to the individuals. They all get a login to see, which is great, which I'll show you in a second. And the 4th step is very important. It's the reporting around the schemes. So the platform writes the reports for you. It sends you the reports when you have to upload them to HMRC and sends reminders. So it's all sort of there. Is there any questions on that? And then I'll briefly just quickly show the recipient portals.
Yeah, sure. A couple just coming in. So first one is to say, is there a best time to set up a scheme for the company?
As soon as possible is the simple answer, because bear in mind, if you're doing an option scheme, people have to buy the options. So they only share, they have to still buy those options to turn them into shares. So if there's 0 value in the business at that point, then you can set the value at nominal value. As soon as you're taking employees on, if you want them to sort of have that feeling of shared ownership. So, it's really common to just get it set up as soon as you can so that people have the maximum amount of value to share it.
Yeah.
Right now, we're having a lot of people having conversations with us because the average amount of time to set up an EMI scheme with all the HMRC notifications things is 3 months. So people are engaging with us now so that they can get their EMI schemes up for Christmas. It seems very early to be talking about Christmas, but that's the time scales.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, and I think you've already given those 6 elements and the structures that you can put in place. You can structure them so that you can safeguard for the business, and the kind of conversations that you've already mentioned that you and the team have are really around that. How do we help recruit retain the best people and reward those people. So these can be structured in a way that safeguards the company whilst making it very attractive and not just always around salary. So yeah, really good point. Final one that's just come in, and before we have any others and you go off to the portal, there's a fairly specific one. So we'll see where we go through with this one, but it says, what is the best way to set up a share scheme in a group structure, in the topco / holding company or the individual businesses, SPVs, below the holding company?
So probably a good idea to have a one-to-one call about the specifics, but what's the end goal? You know, if what's going to sell now, options scheme, if it's an exit only option scheme, and let's say EMI always has to be in the top company. So you set it up in the top co. If the exit occurs in one of the subsidiaries, no one gets paid. You know, what is it the subsidiary that's going to sell? Is it the top co? Is it the SPVs? A mix and a match. We often see, you know, I'm dealing with one currently where there's a top co and 3 subsids. Now, they're not sure whether or not it's going to be the top co or the 3 subsidiaries that are going to sell. So what we're doing is we're setting up a mutually exclusive scheme. So we're setting up a scheme in the top co. If the top co sells, then the schemes in the subsidiaries are cancelled. If it's the subsidiary that sells, the scheme in the top co is cancelled. So because they're not sure how it's going to work, we've actually full belt and braces, essentially, to make sure that everyone gets the full reward. Nice. And you know, one of the criteria that we didn't go through, because there would be other webinars on it, but for an EMI scheme, that would have to obviously be in the topco, in the holding company. So if you did want something that was maximum efficiency, as long as it worked as you've just described, then that might be the way to go as well. So yeah, definitely recommend one-to-ones. So we do free consultations, just so everybody's aware. So I've popped Chris's direct link as well, so you can book a call in directly with Chris just by clicking on that, and you'll be able to see his calendar when he's available and book in a date and a time that's most convenient for you. So yeah, that's it for the time being, Chris, for questions. So yeah, if you want to. Yeah. So what I'll do quickly is I'll just share my screen again, and we will have a look at the platform. So I'm just going to show you the individual recipient portals, because that's a key thing. So let's sort of say these are all of your employees that have options, and we'll pick on Joe Kelly. So this is actually Joe's login. So this is what the individual sees. There's the legal contract. Now, I'm not going to click into that because it's literally a 20-page legal contract. It's not particularly interesting. But I first got given options about 10 years ago now. And I started, it was my first day in my induction, and I had to sign a 20-page legal contract. I had no idea what it was. Not a clue. It didn't motivate me. It didn't retain me, because I didn't understand what it was. So for us, having that visibility is key. So Joe would have this login, and he can go, right, I've got 10,000 ordinary options that were granted today. Right, okay, I'm getting them over 3 years. He's getting his 10,000 over 3 years, but he only benefits at an exit event. So you've got the vesting schedule here. So over a 3-year period, after 3 years, Joe will have all 10,000. So every month he gets some. You see, I love monthly vesting because every month he gets an email. You've got another 277 vest, another 278, another 278. It really builds up that sense of ownership. But what people want to know is, what's it worth to me? So, you know, they come in here and they go, right, the valuation has just been done of £2.5 million. Now this bar will fill up as the options vest. Again, it's just that sort of sense of ownership. They see it going up and up and up. So with 0% growth over the next 5 years, this person's options after they vest will be worth £10,998 with 0% growth, which after tax, and this being EMI, they're only paying 10%. So it's actually worth £9,897 to them. They've actually just saved over £3.5 grand worth of tax. But let's be honest, you're not giving anyone options for 0% growth. So, you know, what would be fair? 20% year on year? After 5 years, their options are worth 27k. 30%. 30% growth. After 5 years, their options are worth £40,824, which after tax is 36,741. They've just saved over 13 grand's worth of tax. Or, the plan is we're going to sell the business for £20 million in 5 years' time. £87,956. After tax, 79 grand. We've just saved over £28,000 worth of tax. Now, we have EMI, I have EMI, Matt has EMI. That's what motivates us. The more we know, the more the company grows, the more our options are. We're a fairly remote company. We had a meetup in Manchester back in May. I was having a beer at the bar with the founder, and we're talking about the future of the company and things. First thing I did when I got home was put that into my calculator to see what it's worth to me. So I can attest that it works. It motivates people. It helps with retention. So that's all. It's all there. But yeah, I mean, I encourage everyone to book a call, have a chat. There's no commitment. We'll have a chat where we can explore if it would benefit you. What would be the best way to look at it? EMI is great, but it's not the right course for everyone. Could it be growth shares? Could it be a mix? So always happy to have a chat.
Thank you, Chris. No specific questions coming in anymore, I don't think. So do ping them in just in case, just before we finish. As I said, we have posted numerous links in throughout and a link there to book directly in with Chris. We do host these webinars on a regular basis. So following on from this, we'll send out the recording to you so that you've got that. And we'll also put in there details of the next one that is approaching. I know it wasn't perhaps we did say there's an accountant on here. So again, if that's of interest for your business or for your clients, we can also have a separate chat about that. So obviously EMI wouldn't be for the accountant, but there's potential with other routes that we've worked with others, particularly around growth shares, but also how we work with accountants who generally also use our platform as well on behalf of their clients. No more questions by the looks of it, Chris. So thank you everybody for joining us. As I said, we'll send out the recording and hopefully see you at some future webinars as well.